Hello everybody. Let's walk through process costing and see how this works. We're going to do both methods. We're going to do the FIFO method and we're also going to do the weighted average. We're going to start with the FIFO method. The first step in doing a process costing problem is to figure out the physical units. Let's do that. They give us the beginning units. They tell us how many units were started. So the units you started with, which were partially done, and the new units you started, which weren't done at all until you started on this period, the total of the 230,000, you either have to finish them or they won't be finished. So that 230 has to be these two boxes, what's finished or completed, and what's an ending has to equal the 230. Because units can't just disappear. If you started them or if you had them in the beginning, you have to do something with them. And the assumption is always that you finish the beginning ones first before you start new ones. So they do give you the ending ones, so we know of the 230 how many were finished, not finished, in ending. So that means the difference must have all been finished. Now for FIFO, we need ones that are started and finished. You'll see that in a second. How many of those? Well, of the ones that were finished, the first 30 came from beginning because we always finish the beginning ones before we start new ones. So that 220, the finished amount, minus the ones in the beginning were the ones that were both started and finished within the period. And the beginning units were the 30 and the ending units were the 80. So this is still physical. This is all physical. We're ignoring percent complete until this point. Now, to do the equivalent units, which is our second step here, we take the physical units times the percent complete that they are. And here we have materials and conversion costs at different completion levels. If they were all the same completion levels, then we would only need one column. But here, since they're different, the equivalent units is not the same. Equivalent unit is the amount of effort that one unit would take. So if you have a unit and it's halfway done, that's a half of an equivalent unit. Okay, so materials. They tell us materials are added at the start of the process. So that means finishing those beginning units, because for FIFO, we're only going to work on stuff we did this period. We're going to ignore any effort towards those beginnings. So that first 60,000 in beginning, it's already done. So we're just finishing it. We're adding the final 40% to get up to 100%. Except for materials. That would be true for conversion costs, except for materials, because since materials are added at the beginning, those units that we started in the prior period and that are 60% complete at the start of this period already have all the materials in. So we wouldn't be adding any materials in order to finish those beginning units. The ones that were started and finished would have had no materials and no conversion costs, so they would have gotten 100% of the effort to finish a unit because we did the whole thing this period. The ending units would get all of their materials because they're added at the start, and we did start them, we just didn't finish them. But then how much? We would have gotten 75%. And of course they have to tell us that, 75% from start to where they are now would have been added in this period to these ones that are not complete yet. So then the EU would be the physical units times the various percents. All right, that's the physical units times the percent. And then we can add these. The next step now is to figure out the cost per equivalent unit. So for FIFO, we're only concerned with the increment we added this period. So we're only concerned with the cost for what was added during the period. Okay, not the cost from the beginning. And then the equivalent units that were added during the period, which we just calculated. So then we can get the cost per equivalent unit by dividing the cost by the units. The next thing is to use this cost per equivalent unit to apply to the equivalent units that were completed and transferred to finished goods or the next step in the process or ending inventory. So for beginning units, we know the cost was. We don't have to assign anything. That's just given. And then we now have to assign the units. So for finishing the beginning units, how many equivalent units was that? Finishing the beginning units was nothing for materials and 12,000 for conversion costs. What about started and completed? That was 192 and 192. And what was the cost of each of those? So materials was this and conversion cost was that. Same thing here. Then we just have to do the math. So the cost of goods made, or the cost leaving work in process and going to finished goods or the next process, is going to be the beginning cost plus these costs assigned to the finishing the beginning and the new started and finished. For ending, grab your equivalent units from earlier. We know the cost per equivalent unit. We can multiply that out. And then we can get the cost for ending work in process. So this 89 would be credited to work in process and debited to finished goods, or increased to finished goods, or increased to the work in process of the next process. And then this would be the leftover or the ending balance in work in process. That's FIFO. What about weighted average? So for weighted average, we don't separate the beginning from the things that we added or worked on this period. We do it cumulatively. The physical units are the same for both processes. So this part is the same for both. But then when we get to 2, we're just going to get the equivalent units for the completed, which was the finished here, and the ending. We don't have to separate out the beginning. So what percent complete? Well, the ones that we finished are 100% complete. And then in the ending, it would have all the materials, but only 75% of the conversion cost of work in process. And then you take the physical units times the percent complete. So there's equivalent units for the period. Now when you get your cost per equivalent unit, you need to add your beginning costs in, because we're doing this cumulatively, not just for this period. So we would get the total cost for those 2 ingredients. Then we would multiply that total cost, divide that total cost by the equivalent units. Equivalent units to date, not just in this period. And so we get a different equivalent cost per unit because this includes the cost of a prior period where the cost per unit may have been different, right? Think about FIFO, where each cost layer might be up or down from the prior period. So here we're letting it blend in. So, okay, so then the equivalent unit for materials and for ending. And we know the cost, the average cost, the blended cost of beginning plus what we did, and then we multiply it out. So the cost of goods made is this total cost. And then the cost for ending work in process is this. So it's not identical to what we had up here, but it's fairly close. What that means is the cost per unit probably didn't shift that much. And that's fine. Now, there's a proof we can do when we want to do it. What we assigned here, these two cells, has to be the total cost. We have to assign all the costs and not more costs than we had. All right, so this is $92,360 if you add those two up. This also must be $92,360. And those $92,360 have to match the beginning cost plus the cost you added, $92,360. If those don't match or within $1 for rounding, you need to go back and find out what's going on. Okay, let me know if you have any questions.